Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this week's Stories of Music. This week we're talking about the history of car audio. First, some statistics. Radios have been in cars almost 100 years. They started to be mass-produced around 1930. Cassette tapes came considerably later. They started around 1968, and they lasted until about 2010. CDs came out in 1983. By the following year, Pioneer had a car CD player available. CD players, of course, lasted till relatively recently. 2019, you could still find cars that had them. By 2020, though, they were mostly gone. The ugly stepsister of car audio, 8-track tape players, they started around 1966, so they were a little earlier than tapes. But by 1983, the year that CDs came out, they were all but gone. But of course, here at Retro, we very much are all about the records. And the question that actually made this topic come up was, did anybody ever try to put a record player in a car? Well, the answer is yes. There were actually 2 attempts to make a car-suitable record player. The first one was in 1956, and it was called the HiFi. It was actually developed by a feller named Peter Goldmark at CBS Labs. Now, Mr. Goldmark had actually been the one responsible for the microgroove technology that made LPs viable back in the late 40s. The HiFi system used a specialized 7-inch disc, and it ran at a very slow speed, 16 2/3 RPM to be exact, which gave each record about 45 minutes of playing time. Now, the HiFi system did have some flaws. As I said, it used a specialized record that couldn't be played under any other system. The selection of records was also relatively small, and there was a very important reason for this. The head of CBS absolutely hated the idea. Now, why? Because CBS also owned radio stations. And obviously, he didn't want to have to compete for listeners with said radio stations. Makes it awfully hard to sell advertising. The second attempt at record players for cars happened courtesy of RCA a couple of years later, but it was only available for model year 1961. Now, it used regular 45s. It was called the Victrola system. So obviously, record selection was not an issue. It also used a 14-disc changer, effectively, which means that you still got a fair amount of time of playing out of them. Each record would be selected in turn by the push of a button. Like some jukeboxes, the needle in the system was actually upside down. It played the records from the bottom, and that was in part to help prevent skipping. However, the pressure, the needle pressure required to keep the record from skipping also produced a bit of a flaw. It was very hard on the 45s. It would actually dig into the grooves, making the system somewhat impractical. As I said, it was only available for model year 1961. Not long after that, as I said, you had tape systems and 8-track systems, which for obvious reasons were far superior. Thanks for joining us for this week's Stories of Music. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.